Hi guys, good morning. Uh, it's a long time since we met, but okay, we have already gone through 3 or 4 units, right? Unit 1 and Unit 2 completely deal with the solar radiation and measurement, and Unit 4 is the solar photovoltaic energy conversion. We already completed these 1, 2 and 4 units. Now the third unit is solar thermal energy conversion. Now let's quickly get into the business and let's see the syllabus. So it's the third unit, solar thermal energy conversion. It has 3 concepts, 3 principal concepts. The first one is solar thermal power generation plants. There are 5 different types of plants which we are going to discuss now. And the second part is solar thermal energy storage, which consists of sensible storage, latent heat storage and thermochemical storage, which we'll also see in this and this thermal energy storage will form the second part of this lecture. And the third part of this unit is the applications of solar thermal energy, like solar water heating system, solar cooker, solar still, solar passive heating systems, solar drying. All these are the 5 applications of solar thermal energy systems. So let's talk about this unit in 3 different videos. The first video will tell you about the solar thermal power plants. The second video will discuss about the solar thermal energy storage. Third part will discuss about the solar thermal energy applications. Right. Now the first part of this is solar thermal power generation technologies. There are many, but in the syllabus we have 5 different technologies. Now let's concentrate on these 5 different technologies. The first one is a parabolic trough power plant. Second one is a central tower receiver power plant. Third one is parabolic dish power plant. Fourth one is solar pond electric power plant. And the fifth one is hybrid solar gas turbine power plant. The first 4 power plants are based on a Rankine cycle, that is a thermal power plant. The last one, the fifth one, hybrid solar gas turbine power plant, in the name itself says that it follows a gas turbine power plant which operate on a cycle called a Brayton cycle. The thermal power plant or a coal-fired power plant works on a principle called Rankine cycle, whereas a gas turbine power plant works on a principle called Brayton cycle, based on which we will discuss about these 5 things. The first one is a parabolic trough solar collector. What is this in this power generation technique, we will use a parabolic trough solar collector. What is this parabolic trough solar collector? As the name itself says, it's in the shape of a parabola. It's a reflector. That means it's a mirror type thing. And you can see that it will be a parabolic trough, and in between, in the center of the parabolic trough, we have a absorber tube. And from this tube, we will pass the water through the tube. And then whenever sunlight falls on that reflector, that reflector will reflect the sunlight onto the absorber tube. So thereby the water which is inside the absorber tube will get heated up and it will become steam, and that steam will be coming out. So the input to the parabolic trough is a cold water, whereas the output to the parabolic trough is a hot steam. What is the source that is converting this cold water into hot steam? It is nothing but the solar energy. So what is this importance in the sense? In a thermal power plant, we have a boiler, turbine, condenser and pump. This boiler is a device which is used for converting the water into steam by making use of a process called combustion. Because of this process called combustion, we are releasing the flue gases, which consist of carbon dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, etc., which are all the global warming gases. Now, in this parabolic trough solar thermal power plant, the boiler in the Rankine cycle is replaced with the parabolic trough collector to convert the water into steam by utilizing the sun's energy. You can see it now. Thermal power plant is boiler, turbine, condenser and pump, which is called a Rankine cycle. Whereas the solar thermal parabolic trough solar power plant, what it will use? Parabolic trough, turbine, condenser and pump. That is, in place of a boiler is replaced by parabolic trough collector for converting the water into steam, and that's why there is no pollution. It's 100% emission free and eco-friendly system. Right, now it is the conceptual diagram. Right, so initially the water will be entering into the solar parabolic trough collector. By making use of the sunlight, this parabolic trough collector will convert that water into hot steam. That hot steam will pass through the turbine, will be made to fall on the turbine, and the turbine will rotate, which is coupled to the generator, and you will get the electrical energy. And the exhaust steam will pass through the heat rejection unit, which consists of a condenser and a cooling tower arrangement, and because of this the water will be condensed in the condenser. The exhaust stream will become liquid again by utilizing the cool water from the cooling tower, and again that water will be again recycled onto the solar parabolic trough collector for conversion into steam, and the cycle will repeat. That is the concept of a solar parabolic trough collector. It is how it will generate the power. This is it. So it consists of different parts like solar collector to produce the steam from water by utilizing the solar energy, turbine to convert the thermal energy of the steam into mechanical energy, generator to convert this mechanical energy into electrical power, and condenser to condense the wet steam exited from the turbine into water by direct contact with cooling water. And where we will get this cooling water? From the cooling tower. And the cycle is called the Rankine cycle. It is the first plant. It is the parabolic trough collector, and the remaining three collectors, the first four are based on the Rankine cycle. The remaining four, the concept is the same. Second one is the central tower receiver power plant. So in this case, the Rankine cycle, the boiler is replaced by solar tower receiver power plant. So what is a solar tower receiver power plant? So since it is replaced by a boiler, the main concept is this: by using this concept, this collector, we are converting the water into steam again, right? The concept is the same. So how we can do it? So it consists of some mirrors. You can see at the bottom of the ground you have the mirrors, and there is a one tower called central receiver tower, and on that tower there is a black body. Now what we'll do, by means of a solar energy, will fall on these heliostats called the mirrors, and that energy will be reflected onto that common focusing point called absorber, which is located on the central receiver tower, right? And that absorber will get heated up, and now water will be sent into that absorber, which is at the top of the central receiver tower, and it absorbs, and it will transfer the heat to the water, and water will become steam. Again the concept is same. Let's see it in the next slides. So here in this central receiver type power plant, the boiler is replaced by a central tower receiver for conversion of water into steam. It is how it will be. So the water from the condenser will pass through the central receiver tower, and the heliostats, which are located at the bottom surface of the ground, will reflect the sun's rays falling on them onto that. They will focus the sunlight onto the tower where the absorber was placed, and the absorber will get heated up, and the water coming from the condenser will converted into steam, and that steam coming from the steam collector will be made to fall on the steam turbine. The turbine will be coupled to the generator to generate the power, and the exhaust stream will pass through the condenser and cooling tower arrangements called the heat rejection arrangement, and the output of this heat rejection equipments are the water, and again water will be passed through the central receiver tower for conversion into steam, and the cycle will repeat. It is how the process will takes place to generate the power. These are the different equipments which are solar collector, turbine, generator, condenser, cooling tower, and the cycle is a Rankine cycle. The third type of power plant is called a solar dish, parabolic dish solar thermal power plant. So what is this? This is also a thermal power plant where the boiler is replaced by a parabolic dish. This system consists of a parabolic shaped point focusing concentrated in the form of a dish that reflects the sunlight onto a receiver mounted at the focal point, right? So this concentrator is mounted on a structure with a 2-axis tracking system to follow the sun, and this concentrator will just follow the sun like this. As I already told you in the fourth unit, there is a thing called a solar tracker, right? 1-axis tracking and 2-axis tracking. We'll use a 2-axis tracking. 1-axis tracking is only seasonal tracking. 2-axis tracking is a daily and seasonal tracking that it will do, so that the energy will be focused onto it, and again water will be passed through this receiver, and it will convert it into steam, right? So in this power plant also, the boiler in the thermal power plant is replaced by parabolic dish for conversion of water into steam based on the sunlight. Here also same concept. Water from the condenser will made to fall on this will made to flow through the receiver, which is there at the focal point of this parabolic dish collector, and the sunlight which is falling on this parabolic collector will be reflected back onto this engine or the receiver, and the receiver will get heated up and convert this water into steam, and steam coming from this parabolic dish solar collector will be to fall on the turbine, and turbine will couple to the generator for generating the electrical energy, and then the exhaust of the steam turbine will pass through the heat rejection unit, which consists of a cooling tower and condenser, and the output is the water, and that water will cool water will again pass through the cool water from the condenser will again pass through the solar parabolic trough for conversion into steam, and the cycle will repeat. It also consists of the same components: solar collector, turbine, generator, condenser, cooling tower, and the cycle is a Rankine cycle. And the fourth one is a solar pond, which is a very peculiar thing. It's also a Rankine cycle, but with a different thing. We'll talk about it. It's an organic Rankine cycle. So let's talk about solar pond. What is a solar pond? Solar pond is also called solar salt pond. Is an artificially designed pond filled with salt water, maintaining a definite concentration gradient. I have given the diagram of a solar pond in this slide, but we'll come to it later part. We'll come to it later for clear understanding of this solar pond. Actually, the solar pond is not a natural pond. It is an artificial or man-made pond. Right, it's a man-made pond filled with salt water, and we have to maintain a definite concentration gradient. So we'll see all these points. So generally, let's talk about it. The solar pond works on a very simple principle that when water is heated, they become lighter and rise upwards. Right, it's a common thing. Whenever you take a water in a bowl, and if you start and if you put the fire under it, the vessel will get heated up. As usual, the water inside also will receive the heat, and once the water receives the heat, it will boil. Once the water boils, the vapor will evaporate. Right, so whenever you heat the water, that water will become light in weight, that is light in density. The density of the water decreases and it will move upwards like a water vapor. Right, the same concept it will use in a solar power plant. Now let's talk about a natural pond. In a natural pond, there is not an artificial pond. Let's talk about the natural pond. More than 30% of solar radiation can go up to 2 meters depth. So the water which is there in the first 2 meters of the solar pond can be heated up, can get heated up. So once the water at the 2 meters depth heated up, because they are heated up, their density will decrease, and that that hot water will come to move upwards to the top layer by means of a process called natural convection. If that happens, the bottom hot layer will come to the top, and at the top what happens? The hot water will come to the top. Now once the hot water reaches the top, heat always flow from high temperature to low temperature. For example, say it is at 50 degrees centigrade, but the surroundings at a temperature of 25 degrees centigrade. Now it starts pumping the heat from hot water to the other surroundings, and thereby until the optimum temperature is reached. Then that is the reason why it always lost the heat to the environment, and it will never be and the natural pond never attain a temperature more than the ambient temperature. Ambient means the natural temperature which is existing at that point of time. Therefore, what we have to do, we need to do something in order to stop this convection. If convection is not there, then what happens? The bottom hot water will never come to the top. That we require. That is what we need to do in a natural, that we cannot do in a natural power plant. That's why I will use a thing called artificial pond called solar pond. In this solar pond, I will cease the convection, I will suppress the convection process to happen. Once the convection process is not happening, the bottom hot water will never come up, and the hot water will be there at the bottom of the pond itself, and that's why we call this thing as artificial pond or solar pond. How I will suppress this, we'll see. So the solar pond, by using the solar pond, I'll dissolve the salt into the solar pond. So freshwater pond will become saltwater pond. Artificial pond, I'll use only 2 meters depth. I'll pass the water through it. I'll pass the soil. What is the salt we'll use? Either sodium chloride or magnesium chloride salts, because they are very cheap in cost. We'll mix it with the salt water. Now the salt water is there. All the salt will go and gather at the bottom layer of the pond. And whenever the sunlight falls, the sunlight can reach up to 2 meters depth. And at the 2 meters depth, we have the salt content, and that's why even though it's get heated up, it will never come up, because of the salt water will be more dense, and that water cannot move upwards. It is the concept. We'll see how it will be done. So a solar pond has 3 zones. The first one is called top zone, bottom zone, and an intermediate, that is the in between zone. What is the top zone? The top zone is called a surface zone or upper convective zone. So which is at the atmospheric temperature and has a very little salt content. This upper zone will be at the atmospheric temperature. I already told you the heat will be always dissipated to the environment. It will always be at the atmospheric temperature called the ambient temperature, and the top layer will be maintained at a very less salt content. And the top and the bottom layer is very hot at a temperature of 70 to 100 degrees centigrade, and it is very salty. We'll make the bottom layer very salty by dissolving NaCl and NgCl2, sodium chloride and magnesium chloride. It is this zone that collects and stores the solar energy in the form of heat, and is therefore known as storage zone or lower convective zone. And the lower zone is called the lower convective zone, and it is in this zone we'll store the solar energy. That's why it is called the storage zone. And in between these two zones there is one more zone called a gradient zone or non-convective zone. Non-convective zone means which we should cease the convection to take place. Now that the convection to takes place, water will have to move from lower convective zone to high upper convective zone. In between this, in this middle layer, we will cease the convection process by adding the salt content to it. How we'll add? We'll add the salt content in such a manner that as the depth of the pond decreases, the salt content also increases. That is the meaning, like top 1/4 kg, and next layer half kg, next layer 1.5 kg, next layer 2 kg, next layer 2.5 kg, next layer 3 kg, next layer 3.5 kg, next layer 4 kg. Likewise, the salt content will keep on increasing. When it is keep on increasing, the convection can be ceased out. And this middle layer will act as a perfect insulator, transparent insulator. What is meant by insulator? It will, first of all, transparent insulator. It consists of two words, transparent plus insulator. What is transparent? It is transparent to the sunlight passing through it. Whenever the sunlight passes on the lower convective zone, upper convective zone, that will be passed through the gradient zone and it will enter to the storage zone. That is the lower convective zone, and the solar energy will be absorbed by the salt over there. But it acts as an insulator to the heat. Now it will never, now because of the salt content, it will never pass the sunlight back, hot water back into the upper convective zone, and because it is ceasing the convection process. That is why it is called a transparent. And one way it is allowing the sunlight, and the other way it is not allowing the hot water to move upwards. That's why it is called a transparent insulator. The trapped solar energy is withdrawn from the pond in the form of hot brine for storage from the storage zone. So what is the purpose? Now the bottom layer will be very hot, and this hot zone will be utilized for conversion of water into steam. Now coming to this diagram. Now it consists of 3 zones. As I already told you, this pond consists of 3 zones. The upper zone is called the upper convective zone or the surface zone, and the bottom zone is called the lower convective zone or the storage zone. And in between these upper and lower convective zones, we have a non-convective zone or a gradient zone. Right? So now what happens to the lower zone? As you can see the diagram over there, as the depth, you can see this diagram, the depth of the pond on the y-axis, and the temperature and concentration on the x-axis. Concentration means salt content. That dashed line is called a concentration line, salt content line, and the solid line is called a temperature line. As you can see it there, as the depth decreases, as the depth increases, you can see as the depth increases from top layer to the bottom, as we are going inside, what happens? That the temperature is increasing, as well as the solar concentration, the salt concentration is also increasing. Now the bottom layer will be very hot. Now through this hot layer we will pass the water, and that water will be converted into steam. It is how we will utilize the solar pond as a boiler for conversion of water into steam. Now let us see heat exchanger. What is a heat exchanger? A heat exchanger is a device which is used to transfer the heat between two fluids. That is, we have a heat exchanger which consists of 2 pipings inside it. So on one side, for example, say on the left side, we are using we are passing the hot fluid through the heat exchanger. The hot fluid will start flowing into the heat exchanger, and from the right side we will pass the cold fluid. Now hot fluid is flowing in one pipe and cold fluid is flowing through another pipe. Now what happens? This hot fluid will transfer heat to the cold fluid, because heat always move from high temperature to low temperature. So the hot fluid temperature, the heat from the hot fluid will be transferred to the cold fluid, and the cold fluid will become, in this process, the cold fluid which is entering into the at the right side will become the hot fluid, and by taking the heat of the hot fluid, and the cold fluid which is entering into the right side will become whereas the hot fluid will become cold fluid, because it is giving away the heat to the cold fluid. That is how the hot fluid we are passing in, cold fluid we are passing in this side. This hot fluid will pass the energy to the cold fluid, and this hot fluid will become cold fluid, and this cold fluid will become hot fluid. This is what is called a heat exchanger or an evaporator, and this we are going to use in the solar pond electric power plant. This is the solar pond electric power plant. So how it will be in the solar pond electric power plant, that the boiler in a Rankine cycle is replaced by solar pond plus evaporator, which is nothing but evaporator is nothing but a heat exchanger. Solar pond plus evaporator system. So we'll see about that. So why this evaporator will be used here? Because that the amount of energy received from you can see it now. The thermal power plant boiler will be replaced by solar pond plus evaporator. So the main purpose of an evaporator here is, we are getting the bottom zone of a solar pond will be at a very low temperature of around 170 to 100 degrees centigrade, and at this centigrade the water will never converted into steam, and that is the reason why we in the Rankine cycle, instead of water we will use a organic fluid called either freon or propane, and this freon or propane will be having a low boiling point compared to water. That is, at 100 degrees centigrade water will be converted into steam, but this propane and freon will be converted into steam at even 70 and 80 degrees centigrade itself, and that is the reason why we will use this even less than at 50 to 60 degrees centigrade itself. This freon and propane will converted, it's a liquids, these liquids will converted into vapor, and that is why we will use this freon and or propane, right? So now what happens now you will see it here. Now let's understand this. Now there is a pump here, condenser here, turbine and a generator, right? It's called Rankine cycle. Generally in a Rankine cycle the fluid will be water, but in this case we'll pass the cold fluid, that is the propane or freon, which is having a boiling point of around 50 to 60 degrees centigrade. Now it's a cold fluid. This cold freon will pass through the evaporator, fine, and then on the other hand what we'll send, we'll pass the cold water into the solar pond, and that cold water will become hot water of around 70 to 90 degrees centigrade. That 70 to 90 degrees centigrade hot water will flow through the evaporator, and cold propane will flow through the evaporator. Now because of this temperature difference, the heat will flow from hot water to the cold freon, and this cold freon will become a hot steam freon, and this cold liquid, because the boiling point is around 50 to 60 degrees centigrade, and we are sending 70 to 80 degrees centigrade hot water from the solar pond into the evaporator, and that water will be and that freon which is flowing through the evaporator will receive the heat energy from the hot water coming from the solar pond, and this freon will be converted into vapor, and that steam will pass through the steam turbine will rotate, which is coupled to the generator, then they will get the power, and this exhaust of this turbine will pass through the heat rejection unit consisting of a condenser and a cooling tower, and the water will be, and the cold freon will again, and this cold freon will again pass through the evaporator. Now in place of a water in a thermal power plant we are using a freon, and the water will be used for collecting the heat from the solar power plant, and after giving away the heat, this hot water coming from the solar pond will become cold water, and cold water will be again sent into the solar pond for converting into a hot water. It is how the solar pond electric power plant works. And the last type of power plant is based on a gas turbine power plant. Now let's talk about what is a gas turbine power plant. The thermal power plant works on a principle called Rankine cycle, whereas the gas turbine power plant works on a principle called Brayton cycle. This Brayton cycle consisting of a combustor. This combustion, nothing but a combustion chamber, will pass the fuel, that is either coal, oil or natural gas, anything. After filtering we'll pass it through the combustor, and then we'll pass the air into it, that is through a compressor. That is a compressed air will pass in through the combustor. So air and fuel will be there, and the combustion will take place, and exhaust gases like CO2, NO2, SO2, everything will be liberated from that combustor, and that exhaust gases will made to fall on the steam turbine, gas turbine now, and the gas turbine will rotate, and it is coupled to the generator. The generator will generate the electricity. It is a way gas turbine power plant works. Now our fifth type of solar thermal power plant is hybrid solar gas turbine power plant. What is this? The concept here is, in the previous case, we are passing the cold air into the combustion chamber, but instead of cool air, if we can pass the hot air into the combustion chamber, there are two advantages. The first one is the amount of fuel required to produce the same amount of heat in a combustion chamber is decreased. So with less amount of fuel itself, we can produce more amount of heat if I pass the hot air into the combustion chamber. It's the first advantage. The second advantage is the efficiency of the system will be increased. So because of these two advantages, preheating of the compressed air reduces the amount of fuel required to produce the same amount of heat, thereby reducing the emission of carbon dioxide. Whenever this amount of fuel required is less, then automatically the amount of combustion taking place is less, and thereby the amount of carbon dioxide emission is also less. And that is the reason why we'll pass the compressed air through the solar heat source before passing it into the combustion chamber. Right? So how we will do it? By using any of the above mentioned four techniques. So here I am using the solar central tower receiver plant itself. So here what I am doing, what is the modification I have did? Again the same thing. There is a combustion, there is a fuel after filtered related to the combustion chamber, and compressed air will be preheated by means of a central receiver tower power plant, and it preheated air will be added to the combustion chamber. Because of that two advantages I already told you. What are those? The first advantage is the efficiency of the power plant increases. The second one is the amount of fuel required to produce the same amount of heat will be reduced, and thereby the amount of emission is also will be reduced. So again the exhaust gases will come, and the exhaust gases will drive the steam turbine, and the turbine will be connected to the generator, and it will produce the electrical power. This is the concept. The gas turbine only, but the gas turbine power plant, in order to improve the efficiency of a gas turbine power plant, the compressed air have to be heated before entering into the combustion chamber. That heating of the compressed air will be done by making use of a solar central tower receiver. That is it. It is the concept of a hybrid solar gas turbine power plant. These are the 5 types of power plants which we are discussing about. In the next video, we will talk about the solar thermal energy storage. Thank you.